Jury consultant Richard Gabriel is with us now. He is the president of Decision Analysis Litigation Strategy. Thank you for being here. You know, as we get ready to cover this case, the jury selection process is unlike any other that we've probably ever seen. It's an unprecedented case, and you'd have to be living under a pretty large rock to not have some sort of opinion going into a case of this magnitude and the highest of profile defendants. How tough is it to seat an impartial jury in this case?
Well, it's really tough. I mean, the trial presumes that he's going to have a trial of impartial jurors, and impartiality tends to imply that people don't know very much about a case, and most jurors that sit on cases don't know anything about the case. However, not only do people know about President Trump, they have strong opinions. Manhattanites specifically also have a long history of President Trump, even before he became president. So people have very strong opinions, and obviously that can filter through, and it can affect the way they interpret the evidence. So part of the process that they're going through right now is finding out people who just say, I can't do it, as this one gentleman said yesterday, because I've got such strong opinions, it's going to be difficult for me to set those things aside and then actually just listen to the evidence impartially. So this process is going to take a while, but there's, as you can see, a lot of jurors who say, I do know myself, I know I may have some strong opinions, but I also self-monitor enough that I can actually listen to the evidence, fairly judge that without letting those affect my ultimate decision.
Yeah, safe to say everyone has an opinion about the defendant, but how much do they know about the case? Maybe that helps weed out some versus others. Of the juror questionnaire, what will the prosecutors be looking for when they ask the questions about opinions, or what news outlet that you get your news from? What stands out to you about the questions they're asking and the answers they may receive?
Well, the easiest thing, obviously, is affiliation. People who follow Trump on Twitter, people who have obviously believe in QAnon or some of the other conspiracy theories, people who believe, obviously, internally, even though they're not being directly asked, that, the election was stolen, or, and obviously, some of those things in terms of Fox News. They'll be looking for some of that just to indicate political preference. That's really the starting point. But I think because jury selection really is jury deselection. You're trying to identify jurors that you want to eliminate, so you ultimately end up with a juror that is favorable to you or obviously neutral. And so they're going to be looking for those jurors who are really sort of outcasts, iconoclasts, people who are going to push against the system. Because remember, Donald Trump only needs one juror, whereas the prosecutors need all 12 in order to convict.
Yeah, good point to make. How about Trump's presence in the courtroom for a jury? What type of impact does that have on jurors, and what instructions will they receive?
Well, it's I think, daunting at first. Here's a former president sitting right there in the presence. They've seen so much news about him, and yet here he is. And having that sort of celebrity thing, I think initially is probably quite evocative. I think after a while, people get used to other people just in the courtroom, no matter how famous they are. Jurors are going to be instructed, obviously, that they can't do any news searching about that. But there is that sort of kind of factor of, here's somebody who is incredibly important in the thing, and either that can influence them positively or negatively. So they're going to have to self-monitor, and obviously those of us watching are also going to go, how does somebody's presence, their potential charisma, might affect the juror in the long run?
And Richard, it's going to be hard not to talk about this case. I mean, 6 weeks minimum it could last. What about the jury safety? Any protections for the jurors throughout this trial?
Well, the jurors are going to be at home. I mean, they're not being sequestered in this case. And the judge has made the jurors anonymous, so the public will not know who they are. So he is trying to do his best to protect the privacy of these jurors and also their safety. There have been lots of threats, and unfortunately, sometimes these things do leak out. So security has got to be very tight, and I'm very much in favor of doing whatever it takes to make sure the jurors can do their job, because obviously, if they're threatened, that can affect the outcome of the trial.
And I have just one quick final question. What if, right, we'll play the what if game. What if they cannot seat a jury of 12?
Well, I'll tell you they will, because there's going to be 38 people ultimately that are around 50 that can say they can be fair. But ultimately, then they're going to try again. And they may take a look at moving the jurisdiction, which Donald Trump moved for a change of venue on. So there are some options if they can't, but I guarantee you they will.
Okay. Richard Gabriel, interesting to be on that jury, to be a fly on the wall in that jury room moving forward. Quite fascinating. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right. Trump's trial expected to last, as I said,